Hello, everybody. Welcome. We will get started in a minute or two. Welcome again. We're halfway through our Science and Practice webinar series. It's gone quick. I think we've seen Howland Research Forest just north of Orono, and then our last tour was at down at the Massapesic in southern Maine. This time we're kind of near the Augusta area, working through talking about ash stand. Before I got started, I just wanted to do our land acknowledgement statement that we respectfully acknowledge the Wabanaki, the people of the Dawnland, the original stewards of the forest. We're discussing today the University of Maine is located on Marsh Island and the homeland of the Penobscot Nation, where issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. The University Center for Research on Sustainable Forests supports forest research, education in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation and other Wabanaki tribal nations. We strongly support the inclusion of Indigenous science and values in forest stewardship management and research, particularly as we talk about today's topic. So we got a great panel that's going to highlight the work that they've been working on, and there's an exciting event coming up on Monday that they will probably allude to. But for now, I will turn it over to our co-partner, Amanda Mahaffey from the Forest Stewardship Guild, to take us and lead us through this great event. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Aaron. And with that, I'm actually going to pass it off to Mike Parisio, who's our first speaker. And all of our speakers can introduce yourselves as you go. So oh, I apologize. We have a brief poll that we wanted to use to just help our speakers get to know you. So our first poll, where are you from? And what background brings you to this meeting? So we'll give you about 60 seconds to complete this poll. And we're wondering how familiar you are with brown ash and the threat of EAB. And also, do you use or think about active management to mitigate the threat of pests and climate change on your lands? So please take a minute to fill out this poll. We're about 30 seconds in, and we will share the results with our presenters. And if you're a presenter, don't touch the poll.
Well, folks are filling that out. Is my screen shared again?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the poll got stopped. All right, I'm going to. All right, I think everyone can see the poll at this point. I'm going to relaunch the poll for just a brief moment. Oh no, I can't, because it's going to clear the existing results. I apologize. So we're going to share the poll results. So of the people that had a chance to answer, many are from Maine and from New England, and we have a Canadian joining us. We have a mixture of foresters, scientists, and other natural resource professionals, and some interested public. Many say that they are familiar with brown ash and the threat of EAB, but about a third of the folks that had a chance to respond have heard of it, but want to learn more. And let's see. So in terms of thinking about active management, there are almost half the folks are not a forest land manager, but want to learn about best approaches. So you're in the right place. Several more are thinking about it, but have not been implementing it. And then a few people are implementing strategies for mitigation. So that gives us a sense. I'm just going to stop sharing the poll. That gives us a sense of where our participants are coming from today. And again, I apologize, the poll was a little briefer than usual, but without further ado, we're going to dive into our speakers who have the most important information to share. So Mike, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Parisio. I'm a forest entomologist here at the Maine Forest Service. And I'm going to start today's webinar just by giving a high-level overview of EAB activity in Maine in the past few years, and basically showing you where it is in relation to our ash resources and what we're doing to monitor and keep track of it. So with that, I'll get into it. So EAB has been in Maine for since 2018. So about the 5-year mark is where things start to get really interesting. And unfortunately, we're seeing some of that with some really rapid spreads. So again, in 2018, EAB was detected for the first time, up in Aroostook County on the border, and then also in southern Maine. So we've been spreading relatively slowly compared to some other states, especially up north. Things have been pretty static, but as you can see here, just a list of the new towns for 2022, a handful in southern Maine, and we already have a couple new towns in 2023 already. But major things that happened in 2022, and I'll show some more slides about what areas are regulated and not regulated. We had 2 detections outside of our regulated areas in Maine. So one of those was in the Lewiston, Auburn area, and the other one further afield was in Oakland, Waterville area. So those are first county records for both of those counties. So here's what the situation looks like in northern Maine. So again, northern Maine has been had an EAB population since 2018. Things have been moving along pretty slowly. Late 2020 did have a detection in Fort Kent using a girdle trap tree. So again, that's one of the monitoring programs I'll talk about. But those red dots, that's basically a point around an EAB positive point, and then the orange zones you'll see on these maps are a 10-mile buffer, and those are areas we consider that are probably could be infested, not guaranteed, but EAB is very hard to detect, so we kind of give it that liberty of thinking that these areas are exposed. So again, some pretty limited movement in northern Maine, but again, that's where a lot of the brown ash is in the state, so something we are paying attention to. Again, southern Maine, things are moving a lot faster. You can see there's a lot more positive points on that map, and we're adding them. Unfortunately, monthly, weekly, as it seems. And so again, the 2 major detections were in Lewiston, Auburn, and Oakland, Waterville area. So I just put this map in here to remind folks we're constantly revising these regulatory areas as needed, and so we're currently in that process. So there might be a new map based on some new detections, and again, those regulatory areas, we can talk about that maybe at the end, but basically to regulate the flow of ash products that may be harboring EAB and to keep them in areas that we know EAB exists and prevent them from spreading into non-regulated areas. So what's at risk in Maine, and I'm sure other presenters will talk about this, but Maine does have quite a sizable ash resource, even though it's only 2% of the ash trees here in Maine. It still amounts to 500 million trees. And you can see in that map on the left, that green shaded area is the basal area, so that the relative density of ash. And so there's quite a lot in central Maine, but you can see also in the eastern side of Aroostook County there, there's certainly a lot of ash and that brown ash resource up there. So you can see how painful that Oakland Waterville detection is, because it's a satellite infestation and it kind of brings EAB right into the heart of our ash resource. So that being said, still only 16% of the ash in Maine are in those regulated areas. So, more than, 80% are hopefully EAB free. And that's what we're all working on to protect right now. And I didn't get reliable stats, but of that 2%, it looks like about 42% of that might actually be brown ash or black ash of that, ash resource in Maine. So that's no small figure for brown ash. I just threw this in here. We'll be visiting their site in Readfield. So just to show that pink star where Readfield falls on the map, so you can see it's an area of interest as EAB is unfortunately encroaching from 2 sides. So what we do for monitoring here at the Maine Forest Service, one of our big programs is purple prism traps. You've probably seen those hanging around the state. So we do 200 of those a year in non-regulated areas, again, to monitor for spread outside of areas where we know EAB already is. So last year we did run 200 traps, but we did not find any EAB outside of the regulated areas using that method. We also do a limited amount of green funnel trapping, so another type of trap that's effective for EAB monitoring. We kind of use this in regulated areas to monitor local spread. And one of the important things we do with these is to, determine if EAB is present in a stand, and that's how we designate some of the stands that we use for biological controls, which I won't have time to talk about, but if folks are curious about that, again, we'll have time for question and answer at the end. So again, a useful tool. We did have some detections using these tools, but again, they're in areas where we already know EAB exists. Biosurveillance is another method. So there are native ground nesting wasps that are actually predatory on beetles that are related to EAB. And now that EAB is present, they'll also hunt EAB. So by learning where those colonies are and monitoring them, we can see what beetles those wasps are bringing back. And so that has been successful here and elsewhere for finding EAB in new locations. And it's one of the neater programs we do. So again, not this year. In the past, we have had positive detections through this, but not this past year, 2022. As I mentioned, that detection in Fort Kent was through the girdle tree. trap program. So that's a method of artificially injuring trees in the spring to make them more attractive to EAB, and then going back and destructively sampling them later in the season to look for any signs of larvae. So again, this has been a very effective tool for determining some of our EAB areas where EAB is present. And then with all this fresh snow, and we'll be out in the field, I can't miss an opportunity to put in a plug for this. Woodpecker activity is really how we're finding a lot of EAB damage, especially in the winter months when woodpeckers are actively feeding on trees that are infested with EAB. So they remove quite a lot of bark during their feeding, and you can see it makes these trees stand out really well, especially during leaf off. And this is the most classic thing we're looking for, where things are really heavily infested. Keep an eye out for this bark, these bark piles on snow where the woodpeckers have been feeding, and please, please, please call us wherever you see that on ash. And that's all I have for my quick intro.
Great, thank you, Mike. I think Tyler has us next. It looks like we have another question for you. So if you can take a moment, and again, if you're a speaker, don't touch the poll, but we'll give you about 30 seconds to complete this one. So for the foresters and loggers present, in recent years, have you intentionally reserved any mature ash trees and harvests that you've been part of outside of EAB quarantine areas? I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds to complete that poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bink. All right, and did the poll share the results? So of the foresters that have answered, let's see, 21% says they've not been part of harvesting operations. 24% said that yes, they have intentionally reserved some mature ash trees, and 16% said that no, they have not. So I'll stop sharing the poll results and we'll continue with our talk. Thank you for that. I think, John, you're up.
Yes, thank you, Amanda, and thank you for sharing those results. Tyler, do you want to go to the next slide? Great, and thank you all for joining today's webinar. And I'm going to be spending approximately 8 minutes kind of going through some introductory slides related to some of our work. And certainly much of our focus is going to be focused on preparation for the field trip on this Friday, and the work that my graduate student, Tyler Everett, is doing. And Mike, I want to thank you for that introduction around EAB. And again, we can also answer questions at the end of this webinar. We've left some time for other questions that might emerge as we go through the presentation. And I'll have other folks introduce themselves, Emily, Andy, in your sections of the presentation. And really, a lot of our work in this coming year is in efforts to build capacity around efforts to protect ash in our forest settings. And much of our work here is focused on brown ash, but we have white, green, and brown or black ash, those 3 native species of ash, all important species, but our focus here is on brown ash that I'll get to in just a few minutes. Tyler, next slide. So brown or black ash is a species that tends to grow in areas that tend to be wet, like they keep their roots or feet wet, and shade intolerant. As Mike mentioned, it's not a huge component of our forest. It's an understory tree, tends to be intermixed with other species, particularly in wetland environments, unlike other places in North America where you might actually find, stands of black ash, large stands of black ash. Here in Maine, in the Northeast, it tends to be an understory tree in those wetland environments. And go to the next slide, Tyler. We have another quick poll question. We wanted to see, do you continue to see value in protecting ash in the forest landscape?
And in the poll, we have an additional question. Would you, as a landowner, be interested in facilitating access to ash trees on your property for Wabanaki basket makers and ash harvesters? Or if you work with landowners, do you think the landowners that you work with would be interested in facilitating access to ash trees on their property for Wabanaki basket makers and ash harvesters? So I thank you for taking the time to complete both of those questions as we have in the poll that is currently up. Give people another 10 seconds or so to complete the poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bink. All right, ending the poll. And we are sharing the results. Everybody, yes, 100% of people say that they continue to see value in having ash trees on the landscape. That's what I'd like to hear. And for folks that are interested in facilitating access, almost everybody says yes. We'll see, 2/3 roughly say yes, and about 1/3 say maybe. We only have 1 no. So I'll stop sharing those results, but thank you for that feedback.
Oh, that is awesome. That's awesome. Next slide, Tyler. Yeah, and again, it's so great to see the response and interest in protecting ash. And I wanted to just briefly talk about some of the significance that really focused around the brown ash tree because of its unique qualities as compared to the other ash species here in our state. But the brown ash tree just has such unique qualities in terms of its ability to be so pliable, pounding. It's the principal material that's used in basket making. And again, I'm a citizen member of the Penobscot Nation, along being a professor here at the University of Maine. My grandparents were basket makers, and it was really an important source of income, selling those baskets to tourists here in our state coming during the summer. And there's also significance around the brown ash in terms of one of its creation stories, where Gluskab shot an arrow into the basket tree, the brown ash tree, and out of the brown ash tree came Indians, the people singing and dancing out of the tree. So it's really kind of woven into our cultural identity, not just for the Penobscot Nation, but for all the Wabanaki tribes here in Maine and tribes in the Northeast and Canada. Brown ash is a really significant tree in terms of its cultural significance. The other part is the ecological significance. And again, we're just learning more in terms of its uniqueness in this wetland environment, where it really does help to regulate and have some hydrological relationship to that landscape. The leaves, the tree itself is just unique from other trees in its surrounding, where the leaves tend to come out later in the springtime, where sunlight can still continue to get down to the forest floor, supporting plants and life on the forest floor. And also in the fall, it tends to lose its leaves a little bit earlier. And those leaves tend to decompose really quickly compared to the other leaves of other trees. And again, that provides nutrients to the soil. So again, it really provides a unique ecological niche in that forest setting. Next slide. And Mike has done a pretty good job kind of looking at the situation with EAB in our state. And I just have to compliment, the efforts of the Maine Forest Service and outreach efforts to really combat the rate of spread of EAB here in Maine. When you look at the number of living trees in our state and the rates of spread, Maine really stands out in terms of most of its ash trees are still living at this point in time. But we also know that it's inevitable that we'll probably have EAB that's going to be spread throughout our state. But the more we can buy time, the more we can conduct research and do important research that will help, hopefully, to sustain ash as a component of our forest, even though we might have emerald ash borer who's going to stay in our forest if there's ash trees. So next slide. So what I'd like to do is recognize some of the tribal partners, who have been working with for many years now. They actually reached out to me early on when they heard from basket makers in Michigan about the emerald ash borer killing the ash trees there in Michigan. They've been a long-standing partner. And again, along with the Maine Forest Service and U.S. Forest Service. I'd like to mention a little bit more about them. But also as part of this presentation, we're going to talk about the work that Tyler Everett's doing with some of the management trials in cooperation with the Greater Augusta Utilities District as one of his study site areas in terms of doing some ash management trials, and he'll get into more detail there. Emily Francis will also talk about some of the ash seed collection efforts that we'll be starting this year and some of the collaboration that we're hoping to get around our ash seed collection efforts. Next slide. And I just want to acknowledge again, really the important tribal partners that's been part of our work for many years now. All of these tribal communities are involved in our research. Not listed here also is the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance. That's also been an important part of our research. And Tyler has been intimately involved also with working in all of these communities in structuring his research studies as part of his PhD work, as well as input that Emily has gotten in terms of the seed collection work that we'll be doing very soon. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Tyler, to present your work.
Thank you, John. Basul, Wabanoke, Wiik, Mi'kmaq, Ak, Talawisi, Tyler Everett. Greetings, I'm a person of the Dawn, I'm Mi'kmaq, and my name is Tyler Everett. As John talked about, I'm going to be getting into an ongoing research project through APCA, which is our lab name. That's the acronym for our lab name, the Ash Protection Collaboration Across Wabanagig. This project was funded by the NSRC, the Northeastern States Research Cooperative, and it's titled Building Stewardship Capacity, focused on Building Stewardship Capacity, Protecting the Brown Ash of the Northern Forest. And it's really focused on the management of brown ash wetland forests in the face of emerald ash borer. But first, before I get into that, I wanted to quickly explain how I got on the research plan of emerald ash borer response. I work for the Passamaquoddy Forestry Department, and at the time, my supervisor in Neptune pointed to some priority concerns for the community and, of course, for the department. And one of those being emerald ash borer and how we respond to emerald ash borer. Fast forward and into my master's program, I knew I wanted to focus on that. I had an opportunity to join a brown ash task force meeting, and this is a group of basket makers and harvesters, tribal natural resource staff, state and federal agency affiliates, and researchers at the university, all focused on emerald ash borer response and having conversations in that space. So it's a great spot for me as a researcher to listen and see what the priorities are. And that's what I did. I learned that there was a need for an inventory protocol tailored toward brown ash wetland forests to give a suite of data so that you could bring ash management in any direction for a particular site. It was well received by our tribal nation partners. We had an inventory demonstration day at the university. And although it was adopted and was carried out by some of our tribal nation partners and the Wabanaki Youth in Science, or WAYS program, a youth program for Wabanaki youth, there was lots of questions about management. And I intentionally left out recommendations for management in the inventory manual because the community needs to have some discussions about that to inform management, because it's a culturally important species. And we want to make sure that we're respectful in that space. And so with those questions, I went back to school naturally. And in my doctoral degree, I'm talking about my research now. So as I mentioned, the community input is a huge part of this project. It ensures that the project's tribal led. And so what we're going to do is hold a series of community meetings with each tribal nation partner. Invite the community to come together in small focus group sessions. We'll share some of these management approaches, talk about the pros, cons, the limitations, and any areas of uncertainty that exist with those. And then come up with, at the end of these community meetings, a tribal supported integrated pest management strategy, or IPM strategy. As we learn from the community and get this tribal IPM strategy, we can take it and apply it and maybe rework our approach in a major component of this research project, which is the management trials that John alluded to. There's a series of 6 study sites across the state. We have 3 in northern Maine. And the idea there was that those sites would be close to the emerald ash borer infestation. Some of those, though, are actually in spots where they might see emerald ash borer later than the ones in central Maine. So we've got 3 in central Maine that are now a lot closer to emerald ash borer because of the detection in Waterville. And so it adds a sense of realism, right? Those satellite infestations, because of the transport of firewood, are a real threat when we talk about ash management, and it's something we need to be cognizant of. So across the board, we've got a good suite of different sites at different proximities to known emerald ash borer infestations. Now, we want to take and apply that tribal integrated pest management approach with management goals in mind. We want to maximize chances of maintaining ash on the landscape. We want to create new cohorts of ash to replace overstory components. And we want to integrate tactics that tribal nation partners support. Some of those tactics that we will include, we know that tribal nations are interested in looking at silviculture that would increase the resilience or the tolerance of these sites to emerald ash borer. So we're going to include that. We also might include biological control releases that Mike alluded to, and then also maybe injected systemic insecticide treatments of certain ash trees at these sites. One other priority action that we know will be a part of these study sites is seed collection. And so I'm going to pass it off now to the other graduate student and actually graduate PhD candidate in the AVCA lab, and Francis.
Thanks, Tyler. That's great. So one of the things that we have identified or has been identified is collecting ash seed. And John did a really great job of highlighting the importance of brown ash in Maine. You've probably heard of uses for white and green ash. They're were very popular street trees and municipal trees. Probably if you have ash on your property from nursery stock, is most likely white or green. And also white ash is a popular timber species and is used for things like veneer and baseball bats and things like that. So all 3 species are very important to the state. And we have talked about the importance of brown ash for the Wabanaki people. So I'm going to specifically talk about harvesting seeds and why that's important. So as emerald ash borer bears down on the state, we're really limited in how, in our time frame of being able to collect seed from healthy ash trees. Ash only produces seed between every 3 to 8 years. So there's really not a guarantee of when we're going to get a crop of seed. So that's one of the reasons why it's really important to be collecting every time ash seed is available on the landscape, specifically for wild species. And collecting from all 3 species of ash is important. Our lab in particular is interested in brown ash for its cultural importance. And you can harvest seed for research and conservation methods for genetic studies, seeds harvest for future plantings, for generation of trees, and for safekeeping in seed banks for long-term storage. And really the goal in mind is to provide those who are invested in protecting this tree species a way to be involved with the current effort of protection via ash collection of the seed. You want to go to the next slide, Tyler? So we have a quick poll question here. Would you as a landowner be interested in having ash seed collected on your property for research purposes? Or if you are a landowner, I'm sorry, I have 2 things popping up here. Or would you work with landowners? If you work with landowners, do you think landowners you would be interested in having ash seed collected for research purposes? Do we have a time for that, Amanda?
Let's give people another 10 seconds to complete the question. Looks like a lot of folks have weighed in and there's a lot of yeses. Spoiler alert.
Perfect.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bink. Ending the poll. Sharing results. And yes, indeed, there's a plethora of interest.
Perfect. That's what we like to hear. Thank you. So the next slide, Tyler. So the APCA lab, our group, what I have been referring to, we're actually a relatively new research lab here at the University of Maine that has had a really great history coming out of the Brown Ash Task Force that Tyler mentioned. And I'm going to just put a plug in. Amanda, thank you so much for sharing. We do have our very first event next Monday. And if you are interested, Ella, our master's student, just put the sign up link in the chat. If you're interested in joining us, we have more than a couple hundred people interested in coming out to hear what we have to say and the program that we'll be unveiling for the rest of the year. And part of that will be this seed collection document that I've been working on as a PhD student and candidate, which is a living document that has the purpose of developing seed collection techniques for the non-researcher. So pretty much what that means is when I started here as a social science background researcher, I did not have the knowledge to be able to go out and collect seeds. So this was a really great exercise for myself and also a request from the community of basket makers, to have a document, to have direction on how to properly collect seed and how to create an avenue for people to be able to take part in this effort. And so the document has finally been finished and ready for public use. We've gone through a review process where the document has been slightly tested and reviewed by some of our excellent partners and people that we've worked with really closely, including the U.S. Forest Service, Maine State Forest Service, Wild Seed Project out of Portland, and tribal basket makers and ash harvesters. And so we will be piloting this document during our APCA trainings, and it will be available on the APCA website when that is live. And what a living document means is that regardless of who is a part of APCA, who is a part of this effort, it will always be updated and have the ability to be updated so that we're always getting the best accurate data out to the community who's interested in seed collection. So if you would like to switch the slide, Tyler. Thanks.
And so now we're going to shift gears over to the consulting forester working with the Greater Augusta Utilities District property, and that's Andy Shultz. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Andy and his many roles that he served. So Andy, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Tyler. First of all, believe half of what you see and none of what you hear about me. At the moment, I'm in on this as a private consulting forester working with the Greater Augusta Utilities District. They've been a long-time tree farm. You can see the picture there. They've well over 50 years. They've got the gold sign. Next slide. That's just a quick map of the lots in Readfield and a little bit down into Winthrop. That large body of water is Carlton Pond, which at one time was the drinking water source for the city of Augusta. No longer, but the utility district now used to be the Augusta Water District. Utility district intends to keep all that land that's protecting that water. It's a beautiful pond, and they look at it as an asset. About 755 acres, not counting the pond. And that's pond, not pond. Oh, well, have to talk to the guy who put that slide together. Okay, next slide. So just briefly, working on a management plan developed actually by Jake Meyer. Many of you might know him back in 2015. I actually became associated with the utility district a couple of years after that. And I've been developing harvesting operations plans based on that management plan without reading it all. Well-managed forest, healthy forest, some timber income, these are high up on their list. Of course, water quality, even though they're not using the pond as drinking water source. And just lately, they've been expanding the recreational opportunities. They've started to establish a network of walking or skiing trails along in collaboration with local Readfield Trails organization. They allow snowmobilers, and generally it is open to the public. It is, however, interestingly, part of a longtime game preserve, so there's no hunting. Next slide. So here's a little bit of a close-up. This is from our harvest operations map showing some proposed harvest areas. The blue rectangle there is the brown ash management trial studying area that some of us or some of you folks will be visiting on Friday. Pretty interesting spot. Some of the largest, straightest, best formed brown ash that I've come across in my career, and so I thought it'd be useful. Tyler agreed, so it's in the study, and there's an agreement between the Greater Augusta Utilities District and Tyler and the University of Maine to conduct the studies, and I think it includes seed collection. I could be wrong. Basically, that's it for me, and hope to see some of you guys out there on Friday.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. And yes, I'm guilty. I had that spelling error on your slide. But I appreciate
I'm sure
it.
it was me.
I love working with Andy. The other day when we went out in the field, I came back to a pastry on my front seat. Andy's always he knows all the great spots to stop and grab a nice pastry or a nice donut. So I've really enjoyed working with Andy. Plus, he's a wealth of knowledge. Shared a lot of great ideas and perspectives with me. So thank you, Andy. So let's get a closer look at the ash management trials study site here on the Greater Augusta Utilities District tree farm. This red outlined area is the extent of brown ash on the property. I went and walked the edge with Andy. It's a small 3.2 acre size stand situated on a hillside seep, which funnels down into what I'm calling the Carlton Pond stream because it dumps into the Carlton Pond. The site's just off of 135 in Readfield. In this study, we have 3/4 hectare or roughly 2/3 of an acre management blocks at each of our study sites. The green polygons on the screen depict those here for this site. For this study site and all study sites in the project, we have the following research objective. So assessing stand level response of brown ash wetland forest being managed with a tribal supported EAB integrated pest management strategy. As a part of that integrated pest management strategy, the silviculture being applied here will be a strip shelterwood harvest with reserves. So you can see here now we've got some strips, some lines here appearing on the polygons, which gives us our research question. What is the stand level response of brown ash wetland forests that are treated with 6 or 9 meter strip harvests with reserves? So let's get a closer look at this. So starting at the top of the screen, we have an experimental management area. This is a 9 meter or roughly 30-foot wide strip harvest with reserves. In the middle is our control block. So no management is occurring here. And on the bottom is 6 meter or roughly 20-foot wide strip harvest with reserves. For both of these treatments, the reserve trees are vigorous, preferably female seed-bearing ash trees. And the idea is that reserving them in the strip allows those trees to linger on the site and protect the species over the long term. But removal of trees in this strip is also a priority, right? We want to allocate growing space to new cohorts of ash. And so to measure stand level response, we will focus on ash and non-ash regeneration or release. We'll also look at overall ash health and survivorship. And then we will also monitor for emerald ash borer in each of these study blocks or management blocks, and look at how emerald ash borer density varies across treatments, which brings in another research question. If emerald ash borer arrives at this site, hopefully this doesn't happen, but we're very close to that waterville detection. As you saw in Mike's map, that was kind of nicely situated. It showed that we were sandwiched between the satellite infestation and the advancing front of the southern infestation. So how does stand level response vary across experimental and control blocks as emerald ash borer arrives on site? Now, beyond emerald ash borer monitoring and silviculture, the IPM strategy being tested, depending on community feedback, could bring in biological control releases, insecticide treatments, and of course, a seed collection, as Emily touched on earlier. So now looking ahead, here's what you can expect if you are able to join us this Friday for the field tour. We're all going to meet at the Castletown Playground parking lot in Manchester at 9:30. We'll all hop into a couple of university vans and shuffle down 135, pull over on the shoulder, and all jump out right here at this spot. Andy and I went and used our snowshoes to stomp a path, but of course, with the snow we got yesterday, might be a good idea to bring snowshoes with. Then we'll trudge it out through the snow to a series of stopping points. At each of these, we'll have different discussion topics. We'll talk about ash ID and seed scouting. We'll get an on the ground visual of the silviculture at this site. And then Tom Newell, who's actually on the call, but his camera's not working, will discuss basket quality ash trees, what he looks for as an ash harvester. Tom's also the forester for the Passamaquoddy Forestry Department. Him and I work real closely together on a couple different projects, including this. And so he can give us some insight there. We'll also install a trap tree for emerald ash borer detection with Mike. And then we'll discuss quarantine rule implications for this study site. And then if you guys are working in the area, it's a great time to use Maine Forest Service reps as a soundboard for your questions, ideas regarding the quarantine update. And then just as a good closing note, as I've been involved, and it's just a brief blip of time compared to a lot of the people who have really supported my work and been involved in this much longer, there's a commonality that unites everybody in this work, which is an interest in protecting ash trees. And the network is huge for ash preservation. And I think it speaks volumes to the value of the trees. And I think it also is a good reason for me to say thank you to all of you for joining this webinar, because you're a part of this network now, being interested in ash preservation and how we can protect this species. We have a lot of project partners that support this work, so we'd like to acknowledge them. On the left side of the screen are our tribal nation partners. We've got the St. Regis Mohawk tribe in Akwesasne, New York, upstate New York, Mi'kmaq Nation, the Houghton Band of Maliseet Indians, Passamaquoddy tribe at Pleasant Point, Sebaik, Passamaquoddy tribe at Indian Township, and the Penobscot Indian Nation. And then we have a lot of other partners that have helped support this. I'm sure we're missing some logos there too. So as we continue to explore management in these forests, before or as they continue to be impacted by emerald ash borer, we should all consider that if we want to collect ash seed to protect this species, if we want to help create access to Wabanaki basket makers and ash harvesters for this species, and if we want to continue to see the ecological values that this species brings to our forests, we cannot cut them all down. We have to identify individuals on the landscape that are to be reserved in our management, because those delegates are the trees that will stay with us, linger on the landscape, and provide the only protection for this species moving forward. And it's our responsibility to see that through. Will Ali, thank you. If time allows, and we have some time, all of us speakers would love to answer some questions. If we don't get to your question, hopefully you can join us in the field and we can discuss it out there in the field.
Bravo. Thank you so much, Tyler and Emily and John and Andy and Mike. This is really fabulous. So if you do have a question, please type it into the chat window. I received one question already, and I'll pitch this to John and Emily. So for landowners that are interested in providing access, or foresters helping facilitate access to brown ash resources for harvest or seed collection, are there resources explaining specific criteria? How should these landowners or foresters start the process, and what might they expect from it?
I think I initially responded to that by saying they can email John. So maybe, John, do you have any more specific ideas for that?
Yeah, I do. they're welcome to get in touch with me. This is a process that we're going to need to work through. We've already worked individually with some landowners, thinking through access opportunities. And it's something that we're going to need to continue to involve the tribal communities in terms of thinking about access and how we share information. So it is something that's going to kind of need to evolve with people kind of working together. And but certainly knowing down the road, ash is certainly going to become more scarce. There's no doubt about it. So having places identified that potentially could be used to sustain cultural practices is really vital. But again, we kind of need to work almost individually with some of the landowners, and we plan to share some of the policies and ways things have been done with certain landowners that could maybe be used as a model for other landowners. But that's something that is part of our workshop series this coming year.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. I have another question that I'll pitch to Tyler and Andy. So looking at the harvest layout, was sunlight direction a factor as you were considering how to lay out those strip shelter wood harvests?
I can field that one. With Andy's input too, we thought about wind throw being the primary driver as to the orientation of those strips. And then we have some questions for the group when we're out there in the field in terms of, are we even creating enough sunlight for a shade intolerant species? And those are kind of the internal battles we're facing when we think about what we're doing. But hopefully we can get some good feedback from folks. Andy, anything you want to add?
Well, I'll be interested to see how things work here too, because as we discussed in the field, 6 meters, 9 meters, these are not really very wide areas. And but it does remind me of something that fellow I used to work with that you may know named Keith Canody says, that this is research, not necessarily forestry. So somewhere between research and forestry, we'll come up with something and we'll see what happens.
That's why any questions you have in the field about practicality, if you want to challenge it, those are great. That's great feedback. Because we do want to be practical.
Yeah, again, thank you to both of you for trying something. I think for all of the bigger picture thoughts on adapting our forests and especially ash to the changing climate and all these other threatening conditions, trying something is better than trying nothing. So I'm really glad that you're trying it somewhere between research and practice so we can learn from it. We had another question that came in, I think also for Tyler. What are your thoughts, Tyler, on how the shelterwood harvest might promote resilience to EAB? That is, how might these harvests promote regeneration or improve growth in residual trees that might help with EAB? Thanks.
Yeah, so another thing I didn't get to touch on because I was trying to be cognizant of time was that in the areas outside of those strips, there's still going to be a lot of trees that are low vigor if they've experienced some other sort of stressor in its lifetime. We might take those trees as well. And the idea is that those trees that are low vigor are the ones that emerald ash borer is going to be targeting and get pulled to that site for. And then as emerald ash borer infests those, we get a boost in the emerald ash borer population, and the intensity of infestation at that site increases. So by removing those low vigor trees, we're inherently making the site more resilient to emerald ash borer, or can tolerate emerald ash borer a bit more. As a lot of researchers point out, regardless if we do that, emerald ash borer still has a devastating impact on the site. But what we do is buy time. So if we can establish regeneration in those strips or release younger cohorts of ash that exist in those strips, they're the next generation of ash trees that may not be taken out by emerald ash borer in this advancing front. It may take some time, and those ones that linger on the landscape are what can buy us the time to see things like the biological controls become established, and help alleviate some of the intense pressure that emerald ash borer is having on our ash forests.
Yeah, again, thank you for that. And I know today you didn't get into the broader geography out to the lake states very much. There are other forums for that, but one of the advantages that we have here fundamentally is that EAB has not yet run its course through all of Maine. So we have a chance, we have an opportunity here. Another question has come in from Justin. He says, great presentations. Do galleries from EAB affect the utility of ash for basket making?
John, did you want to touch on that? I can share. I have seen a basket made of a tree that's been impacted by emerald ash borer, and the galleries actually were in the splints, and it was more of a statement that, you know, we're being resilient in our cultural practice, that you can still carry out the cultural practice, but it's a lot of work to make a basket. And Tom's on the call, and I've helped him pound a couple of ash logs, and I've taken a swing at it myself, and it's a lot of work just to process the material. So to go and grab a tree that you know is going to have galleries, and then put that much effort into producing material for basketry, it's not something anyone's eager to do. So they would choose a healthier ash tree over one that's been impacted 9 times out of 10 anyway. But it does eventually also lead to some staining. Even trees that aren't necessarily being impacted by emerald ash borer, but are low vigor and have different insects infesting it, there's been some staining on the splint material, which results in a lesser quality product during the processing. So
Yeah, that's good, Tyler. And I would just add, you know, I think the long-term goal is hopefully we do have development of more resistant ash trees to EAB that would make it a suitable, you know, basket tree that's not impacted by EAB in the galleries. That's our long-term goal as part of it being in our forest. So we have usable trees.
Thank you. And a quick follow-up related question, the same for insecticide in trees. So trees that have been injected, would those still be used or would that affect the utility of those ash for basket making?
Yeah, typically what we're thinking about with the insecticide treatments is really to have those trees be seed producers, live seed, not necessarily for used for making baskets. It's not recommended that those trees, once they're treated, be used for basket making, or at least, you know, if it's 5 or more years afterwards, just with the half-life of the insecticide treatment. We're really kind of looking at it as a strategy to retain ash on the landscape, and also, you know, to retain kind of a live seed production that might be taking place in the forest.
I'll just add too that, you know, we have to prioritize what trees we inject. And if there's a poor form but really vigorous tree, it's not going to be used for basketry. But if we inject it, we're at least protecting that tree for its seed source. And then we can also really well mark our injected trees. So this tree that is unlikely to get selected for basketry, but is also a good mother tree, we inject that tree and well mark it. We can make sure that it doesn't affect a basket maker. They can make the decision, oh, that's been an injected tree, I won't harvest it. Plus, the chemical is expensive, so we don't want people cutting down the trees that we're trying to save.
That makes sense. Thank you. We had another question. Nancy is asking, is it still the case that no resistance has been seen by brown ash in areas where EAB is already present? I know some resistance had been seen in white ash. I don't know if Mike wants to take that one.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. Great question, Nancy. And yeah, unfortunately, you know, as grading vulnerability to EAB, you know, between the ash species, you know, black ash does score the worst for whatever reason. I don't know that they ever found a physiological reason, but proportionally, a single gallery does more damage to a black ash, you know, as far as, you know, the area affected or whatever. But as Amanda was saying, you know, and that's why this research going on here is so interesting. Again, Maine has not seen the full effects of EAB, and this stuff is still just starting to unfold in the upper Midwest with the longest invasion history. And so, you know, that's where a lot of this newer resistance study stuff for white ash is coming. And I know Nate Siegert's, you know, looking at resistance for green ash. I think he's looking at black ash too, but I don't even know if things are that far along, where this has been really studied in a ecosystem dominated by purely black ash. So I hope something happens like that. But yeah, it is a tall order for brown ash, unfortunately.
Thank you. I'll give folks another few seconds to drop a question in the chat, and I have a kind of a closer question for all of you, but we'll give people another moment to type.
I'll add to that comment from Mike that for brown ash, we work with Jennifer Cook, the US with USDA, and she's doing a lot of the genetic work with all 3 ash species in terms of resistance to emerald ash borer. And there's a lot of excitement around brown ash because it does have a lot of the genetic codes that Manchurian ash, an ash that's native to the region of emerald ash borer. They have a lot of similarities, and the codes that are related to the response for Manchurian ash that make it resistant to emerald ash borer happen to be found in the genome of North American brown ash or black ash as well. And so there's a hope, a really promising glimmer of hope that with very limited small scale breeding programs, you might find resilient or resistant brown ash, and something that would be close to what we have on the landscape now, which basket makers would very much so appreciate.
And that kind of steals the thunder for my closer question, which is what gives you hope for ash resiliency? Tyler, that was a great message of hope. Do you want to add anything onto that?
I think I'll just add real quick that so if we have that glimmer of hope that there's maybe some resistance genetically that could come to fruition with some breeding programs, or even maybe there's a resistant ash on the landscape right now and we just haven't seen it because emerald ash borer hasn't come through and been deterred by it. So we won't find that tree if we cut them all. So if we, no tree, and this is a quote from Tony D'Amato, not from me, but and I love it. No tree is going to survive a chainsaw, but there's a potential that a tree could survive emerald ash borer. So if we cut them all, there's no chance we'll see that come about. So reserving ash on the landscape is an important practice.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? What gives you hope for ash resiliency?
I'll just add, I'm just really pleased with the folks that joined this call today. And already we have, I think, up to 400 people that are planning to join the call on Monday. So just the interest that people have gives me hope in terms of wanting to be more involved in inventory work, potential seed collection work, and other avenues of trying to retain ash in our forest. So that gives me hope.
Awesome. I see Andy Shultz, you're nodding your head. You have hope for resiliency for ash? Thumbs up.
I think it's great that people are still trying stuff. There's obviously been a long track record of a lot of early attempts to do projects like this and similar things that have had bad results, but people aren't giving up, and that's what's really important, because one of these times somebody's going to do something a little different, and something different's going to happen, and there might be some interesting things in the future.
Sorry, thanks, Mike. Andy, did you want to jump in?
No, just to echo what everybody else said, and I guess the only other thing I would say is that what gives me hope is that there's enough interest in funding in this whole project to provide lunch on Friday.
And Andy's always good on the baked goods, so thank you. Emily, in the last minute, any last words of hope?
I think that it's really great that we have so many grad students involved, and we have newer grad students. So on the more academic research front, we definitely have some people who are coming in to continue the work for the long term.
That sounds great. less than a minute to go. So thank you. Huge round of applause from all of our virtual participants. Thank you so much to our speakers for that excellent presentation and for preparing the field trip for this Friday. It's going to be great. Last chance to sign up if you haven't. It's going to be really awesome. So thank you everyone so much. Thank you University of Maine for co-hosting, and we will look forward to seeing some of you on Friday.